Good evening, and welcome. If you are listening to this with tired eyes, or while the room around you slowly fades into quiet shadows, you are exactly where you need to be. This is not a place for urgency or effort. This is a place where history moves slowly, speaks softly, and allows your thoughts to loosen their grip on the present. This is boring history for sleep. Tonight, we are going to step gently into a world that feels familiar at first, but quickly becomes strange when we look closely. We are going to talk about beauty. Not beauty as it appears on screens, in mirrors, or in carefully edited images, but beauty as it existed hundreds of years ago, in the medieval world. In that world, beauty was not something people chased for pleasure. It was not about confidence or self-expression. It was not even primarily about attraction. Beauty was a signal, quietly shaped by daily life, hardship, belief, and survival. When someone in medieval Europe looked at another person, they were not simply seeing a face. They were reading a story. Skin, hair, posture, and clothing all whispered clues about where that person belonged in society, how they lived, and what kind of life they were likely to endure. A pale face suggested shelter and protection from the sun. A strong, full body hinted at access to food in a time when hunger was common. Covered hair and modest dress spoke of virtue and obedience in a deeply religious world. Nothing about appearance was accidental, and very little of it was truly free choice. Beauty, in the medieval mind, was tied to order. It helped maintain the fragile balance of a society where everyone was expected to know their place. To look beautiful often meant to look appropriate, restrained, and aligned with the expectations of your class and gender. And yet, despite how rigid these standards could be, people still cared deeply about how they looked. Not because they wanted admiration, but because appearance shaped how safely they could move through the world. Looking wrong could invite suspicion, judgment, or even punishment. Tonight, we are not here to judge these ideas. We are here to observe them quietly, the way one might observe a flickering candle or the slow movement of clouds across the moon. There is no need to remember details or dates. There is no test waiting at the end. As we begin, you may notice that medieval beauty feels distant and unfamiliar. That is natural. But as we continue, you may also notice something else. Beneath the strange customs and old beliefs, there is a very human desire quietly present, the desire to be safe, accepted, and at peace within one's world. So allow your breathing to slow. Let the present day loosen its hold. We are about to walk gently into a time where beauty was less about pleasure and more about survival. And we will begin by understanding what beauty truly meant in a medieval world. To understand beauty in medieval times, we must first set aside modern ideas. Today, beauty often feels personal. It is linked to identity, confidence, and self-expression. In the medieval world, beauty was something very different. It was not about standing out. It was about fitting in. Medieval society was rigid, layered, and deeply unequal. Life was shaped by labor, weather, illness, and scarcity. For most people, survival came before comfort, and comfort came long before pleasure. In such a world, beauty did not exist for enjoyment alone. It served a purpose. Appearance acted as a silent language. It communicated information without words. When people looked at one another, they were not simply noticing features. They were interpreting signs. Skin was one of the clearest signals. Pale skin was admired not because it looked delicate, but because it suggested a life spent indoors, away from the sun. It implied that someone did not work long hours in the fields. It hinted at status, protection, and relative security. Darkened, weathered skin, by contrast, revealed a life shaped by physical labor and exposure. Beauty, then, was not something separate from daily life. It was shaped directly by it. Body shape carried similar meaning. in a time when food shortages were common and famine was a constant fear. A fuller body was associated with abundance. It suggested access to food, warmth in winter, and strength during illness. Thinness was not admired. It often signaled hunger, poverty, or weakness. What modern eyes might interpret as excess, medieval eyes often read as safety. Beauty was also deeply moral. The medieval world was guided by religious belief, and appearance was thought to reflect inner character. Modesty mattered. Controlled gestures, calm expressions, and restrained clothing were signs of virtue. Excessive display or flamboyance could invite suspicion. Hair, clothing, and posture all played a role in this moral language. Covered hair, especially for women, signaled obedience and humility. Loose or uncovered hair in public could suggest immodesty. Clothing that was too elaborate for one's class could be seen as dishonest or sinful. Beauty helped maintain social order. It reinforced boundaries between classes, genders, and roles. Nobles were expected to look different from peasants, clergy from soldiers, women from men. To blur these lines was to risk social tension. Art from the medieval period reflects these ideals clearly. Faces in paintings appear smooth and serene. Bodies seem untouched by exhaustion or hardship. These images were not realistic portraits of everyday people. They were visual ideals, shaped by belief rather than observation. Most people did not look like the figures in paintings. They lived harder lives. They aged faster. Their bodies bore marks of labor and illness. And yet, these idealized images still mattered. They offered a vision of order, calm, and divine harmony in a world that was often unpredictable and harsh. Despite the rigidity of these standards, people still made efforts to align themselves with them. Not out of vanity, but out of necessity. Appearance influenced how one was treated, trusted, and judged. To look appropriate was to move more safely through society. Beauty in medieval times was not about personal fulfillment. It was about belonging. It was about survival within a structured world where deviation could carry consequences. As we move forward, we will begin to look more closely at individual features and practices. We will start with the most visible sign of all, the skin, and what it revealed about class, labor, and daily life. If we were to walk slowly through a medieval village, early in the morning, the first thing we might notice is not the buildings or the narrow roads, but the people themselves. More specifically, we would notice their skin. In the medieval world, skin told a story long before anyone spoke a word. Pale skin was admired. Not because it looked delicate in a romantic sense, but because it suggested something very practical. It meant that a person did not spend their days working under the open sky. It implied shelter, shade, and protection from the sun. In other words, pale skin quietly announced that someone lived a life removed from the hardest forms of labor. To medieval eyes, this was beautiful. Sun-darkened skin told a different story. It spoke of fields, long hours, rough weather, and physical exhaustion. It revealed a life shaped by necessity rather than choice. Darker skin was not considered ugly, but it was unmistakably associated with work, especially agricultural labor. And in a society where class divisions were sharp, this association mattered. Beauty was never separate from daily life. It was carved into the body by routine. Imagine a peasant waking before dawn, stepping outside as the sky slowly brightened, working until the sun reached its highest point, and continuing until evening shadows returned. Over years, this life shaped the skin, the hands, the posture. The sun left its mark, quietly and permanently. Now imagine someone whose days unfolded indoors. A noblewoman managing household affairs from shaded rooms. Or a man whose work involved writing, administration, or prayer. Their skin remained lighter, softer, untouched by constant exposure. This difference was visible, immediate, and understood by everyone. Pale skin, then, was not an abstract ideal. It was a visible sign of privilege. There was also a medical and cultural belief attached to skin color. Medieval medicine, influenced by ancient theories, often connected complexion to balance within the body. Pale skin was associated with calmness, moderation, and refinement. Excessive redness or darkness could be interpreted as imbalance or roughness. Even though these interpretations had little to do with health as we understand it today. But no one needed medical theory to understand what pale skin truly meant. The meaning was written clearly in everyday experience. Of course, not everyone could achieve this ideal. And most people did not expect to. Beauty standards were not goals for everyone to reach. They were markers that reinforced existing divisions. A peasant woman did not wake up hoping to look like a noblewoman. That would have been unrealistic, and perhaps even dangerous. Instead, people learned to accept what their appearance communicated. There is something quietly sobering about this. Beauty, in this sense, was not aspirational. It was descriptive. It described the life you lived, not the life you dreamed of. And yet, small efforts still existed. People avoided unnecessary sun exposure when possible. Hats, veils, and head coverings served practical purposes, shielding the face. Staying in the shade during breaks mattered. These were not cosmetic choices in the modern sense, but habits shaped by comfort and survival. For women especially, skin carried layered meaning. A pale complexion suggested not only wealth, but also modesty. It implied that a woman remained indoors, within the boundaries of accepted social behavior. Sun-darkened skin could invite assumptions about labor, but also about freedom of movement, which was not always viewed positively. Beauty standards, then, quietly reinforced expectations about gender. Even medieval art exaggerated this contrast. Painted faces often appear almost luminous, glowing softly without any trace of sun or strain. These images were not meant to reflect reality. They offered reassurance. They showed an ordered world where everyone appeared calm, clean, and untouched by hardship. In reality, life was far messier. Most people lived between these ideals and their daily routines, aware of the standards but not fully defined by them. Pale skin was admired, but survival mattered more. Fields still needed tending. Animals still needed care. Work did not stop simply because beauty favored shade. And perhaps that is what makes medieval beauty so quietly revealing. It did not deny reality. It simply placed value on distance from hardship. As we continue, we will move from the surface of the skin to another part of the body that carried its own strange and telling expectations. A place where beauty required patience, discomfort, and a steady hand. The face. Once medieval people had read the message written on the skin, their attention moved upward, slowly, to the face itself. Not the eyes just yet. Not the smile. But the forehead. To modern eyes, the medieval fascination with foreheads can feel strange, almost humorous. Yet in its own time, the forehead was one of the most carefully observed parts of the face. It was seen as a sign of refinement, intelligence, and noble calm. A high, broad forehead was admired. And if nature had not provided one, medieval beauty culture quietly suggested ways to adjust reality. In paintings and illuminated manuscripts, Faces often appear elongated and serene. The hairline sits higher than expected, creating an open, pale space above the eyebrows. This was not accidental. It was an aesthetic choice, repeated so often that it became an ideal. A low hairline could suggest earthiness, labor, or animal closeness. A high forehead, by contrast, suggested distance from the physical world. It implied thoughtfulness, restraint, and control. The medieval mind did not separate beauty from character. Appearance was believed to reflect inner qualities. A calm face suggested a calm soul. An open forehead suggested clarity of thought. And so, some people altered their appearance accordingly. Hair was plucked. Not shaved entirely, but removed carefully, strand by strand, along the hairline. The goal was subtlety. A slightly higher forehead, not an obvious one. Enough to reshape the face without drawing attention to the effort itself. Eyebrows, too, were treated with similar care. Unlike modern beauty trends that emphasize bold or expressive brows, medieval ideals favored thin, gentle lines. Thick eyebrows could be associated with roughness or excessive passion. Lightly shaped or even nearly invisible brows created a softer, more controlled expression. Again, this was not about individuality. It was about fitting into a shared visual language. The act of plucking hair was slow and uncomfortable. There were no modern tools designed for comfort. This was a quiet form of endurance, practiced in private, often without mirrors as clear as those we use today. Polished metal or reflective surfaces provided only vague guidance. Beauty rituals were not indulgent pleasures. They were obligations carried out patiently. What matters most is that these practices were not universal. They were markers of class and environment. Someone working daily in the fields would not have the time, tools, or privacy to shape their face this way. Nor would it have been expected. Once again, beauty signaled distance from labor. The face, like the skin, told a story about how someone lived. A carefully shaped hairline suggested time spent indoors. It suggested that someone else handled the physical burdens of life. Medical and philosophical ideas reinforced these preferences. Medieval thought often linked facial structure to mental qualities. A smooth, open forehead was associated with reason and moderation. Heavy features were sometimes interpreted as signs of imbalance or excess. These interpretations were symbolic, not scientific. But symbols were powerful. They influenced how people judged one another at first glance. Marriage prospects, social trust, and reputation could be shaped by these subtle visual cues. It is important to remember that medieval people did not see these practices as extreme. They were normalized within certain social circles. Just as today's beauty routines feel ordinary to those who practice them, medieval grooming habits blended quietly into daily life. Still, there were limits. Altering the face too dramatically risked appearing deceptive or unnatural. Balance was key. Beauty was meant to appear effortless, even when it required effort. The ideal face was calm, pale, symmetrical, and restrained. It did not shout for attention. It rested gently within accepted norms. In art, this ideal became frozen in time. Faces appear peaceful, distant, and almost otherworldly. The lack of strong expression was not a lack of skill. It was intentional. Emotional restraint was beautiful. In real life, of course, faces were more varied. People laughed, frowned, squinted against the sun. But when they imagined beauty, they imagined stillness. A face untouched by strong emotion. As you listen now, It may be easy to smile at the idea of plucked hairlines and softened brows. But beneath these practices lies something very familiar. The desire to shape the face to match what society values has never disappeared. Only the tools and styles have changed. In medieval times, the face was gently edited to suggest calm, status, and inner balance. It was shaped not to stand out, but to blend smoothly into an ideal shared by art, medicine, and belief. As the night deepens, let this image settle quietly. A candlelit room. A reflective surface. Slow, careful movements. A face being adjusted, not for vanity, but for belonging. From here, we will move downward again, from the face to the body as a whole. We will explore how shape, softness, and size carried their own meanings, and how the medieval body itself became a canvas for expectation. For now, rest with the quiet patience of these rituals. Nothing hurried. Nothing sharp. Just small adjustments, made slowly, in the soft light. If you were alive in medieval Europe, your body would speak before you ever did. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But quietly, through softness, posture, and stillness. In a world without mirrors on every wall, without scales in bathrooms, and without words like fitness or diet culture, beauty was not something to be optimized. It was something to be noticed slowly, often from a distance, and interpreted through the lens of survival, comfort, and status. To modern eyes, medieval beauty ideals can feel confusing, sometimes even contradictory. But when we slow down and listen carefully, a pattern begins to emerge, one that values calm abundance over sharp definition, rest over motion, and fullness over strain. In medieval society, a beautiful body was not expected to look busy. Softness, in particular, carried meaning. A slightly rounded figure suggested that one had access to regular food, warmth, and rest. It hinted at a life not dominated by relentless physical labor. This was not indulgence in the modern sense. It was reassurance, proof that the body had not been worn thin by hunger or exhaustion. Thinness, especially when extreme, did not signal discipline or elegance. More often, it suggested illness, poverty, or fragility. A body that appeared too narrow, too angular, or too sharp raised quiet concerns. It whispered of missed meals, hard winters, or long days of work that never quite ended. And medieval people noticed these things instinctively. Beauty was read the way one reads weather patterns or soil quality, not with judgment, but with familiarity. This does not mean medieval ideals demanded excess. There was no celebration of overeating or physical heaviness for its own sake. Instead, the ideal body rested gently between scarcity and strain. It looked nourished, calm, and unhurried. It suggested balance in a world where balance was rare. Clothing played a crucial role in shaping this impression. Medieval garments were not designed to reveal the body's exact form. Instead, they softened it. Layers of fabric draped rather than clung. Belts sat gently at the waist, guiding the eye without sharply dividing the figure. Sleeves flowed. Skirts fell in slow vertical lines. The result was a silhouette that appeared stable and composed. Movement, too, mattered. A beautiful person did not rush. They did not fidget. Their presence felt settled. Stillness itself became part of the aesthetic. In a time when many bodies were constantly in motion, working fields, carrying loads, walking long distances, a body at rest appeared almost luxurious. Soft hands, for example, were admired not because they were delicate, but because they showed what they had not endured. They had not been hardened by tools or weather. They had been allowed to remain gentle. This logic extended beyond class, though it appeared most clearly among the nobility and merchant families. Even among common people, there was an understanding that a body worn too thin was a body in danger. The medieval world was deeply familiar with hunger. Crops failed. Winters lingered. Bread grew scarce. Under these conditions, a body that retained softness was quietly impressive. It suggested resilience. Women's bodies, in particular, were expected to reflect this calm abundance. Rounded shoulders, full hips, and gentle curves were associated with fertility, stability, and continuity. These traits were not idealized through exaggeration, but through moderation. The body was not meant to shout its beauty. It was meant to hold it. Men, too, were subject to these ideals, though expressed differently. A man admired for his appearance was not excessively muscular or sharply defined. Such features implied labor, struggle, or constant exertion. Instead, an attractive male body suggested strength without tension, capability without display. Broad shoulders softened by layers of cloth. A solid stance. A face that appeared rested. Again, stillness mattered. It is important to remember that medieval people did not analyze bodies in the abstract. There were no charts, no categories, no measurements. Beauty was absorbed slowly, almost unconsciously, as part of daily life. One did not stand before a mirror critiquing proportions. One encountered bodies in motion, or more often, at rest, and formed impressions shaped by shared experience. A body that looked warm in winter. A body that endured long evenings without complaint. A body that moved without urgency. These were beautiful bodies. Even posture contributed to this quiet language. Slouched bodies hinted at fatigue. Rigid bodies suggested tension or fear. An upright but relaxed posture conveyed confidence and composure. Beauty, then, was not merely visual. It was atmospheric. And this is perhaps the most unfamiliar part for modern listeners. In medieval Europe, beauty was less about being seen and more about being felt. It lingered. It blended into rooms, into candlelight, into shared silence. It did not demand attention. It allowed it. This may be why medieval beauty ideals seem so closely tied to calmness. In a world full of uncertainty, illness, hunger, sudden loss, a body that appeared untroubled offered comfort. It reassured others that life, at least for the moment, was holding together. Softness was not weakness. Stillness was not passivity. Fullness was not excess. They were signs of survival. As we drift through this idea now, it may feel strangely restful. The medieval body ideal asks nothing of us. It does not urge improvement. It does not promise transformation. It simply rests. And perhaps that is why it fits so naturally into the quiet hours of the night, when the world slows, when motion fades, and when the body, at last, is allowed to be still. If beauty in the medieval world had a voice, it would not shout. It would whisper, softly, through layers of fabric, through the weight of wool resting on shoulders, through linen brushing against skin. In an age without mirrors for most people, clothing did not simply cover the body. It translated the body into something meaningful. Something readable by others, something quietly beautiful. To modern eyes, medieval clothing often looks heavy, restrictive, even uncomfortable. And in many ways, it was. But to medieval people, these layers were not burdens. They were signals. Clothing was the language through which beauty was expressed, controlled, and understood. Let us begin with fabric itself, because fabric mattered more than shape. In medieval Europe, beauty did not come from revealing the body. It came from how well the body disappeared into cloth. Linen, worn closest to the skin, was valued for its cleanliness and softness. A clean linen undergarment suggested care, discipline, and moral order. Wool, thicker and heavier, was the backbone of everyday clothing. It held warmth, shape, and social meaning. Silk, when it appeared, did not whisper at all. It spoke clearly of wealth, distance, and power. But silk was rare. For most people, beauty lived in wool that was well spun, well dyed, and well maintained. A smooth wool gown, evenly colored and carefully mended, was far more attractive than a body itself. Clothing softened the human form. It blurred sharp angles. It rounded the body into something calm and stable. This was not accidental. Medieval beauty favored bodies that appeared nourished, rested, and still. Flowing garments helped create that illusion. Notice the word illusion, because much of medieval beauty was exactly that. A gown did not show a narrow waist, it suggested balance. Sleeves did not reveal arms, they created gentle lines that moved slowly. Long skirts erased the shape of legs entirely. The goal was not to highlight individual body parts, but to present the body as a harmonious whole, wrapped, contained, and unhurried. Belts, for example, were not tools to tighten the body. They often hung low, loosely, sometimes even decoratively. A tightly cinched waist was not the ideal. A relaxed belt suggested comfort and quiet prosperity. You had eaten enough. You were not rushing. You belonged. Color played its role gently, too. Bright colors existed, but they were not worn carelessly. Reds, blues, and greens were often muted by natural dyes. The result was softer tones that aged with time, much like parchment. Wearing a stable, even color showed patience. It showed that you could afford clothing that lasted. Clothing that did not fade quickly. In this way, beauty became a slow thing. It was not refreshed daily. It accumulated over time. There is something deeply soothing about that idea. Clothing also signaled moral beauty. Excessive decoration could be dangerous. Church authorities warned against vanity, against garments that drew too much attention. A beautiful person was not one who dazzled, but one who appeared modest, orderly, and appropriate. This is where humor quietly enters the medieval wardrobe. Because despite all the rules, people still wanted to stand out. Sleeves became longer than necessary. Hats grew taller, wider, more elaborate. Shoes stretched into pointed shapes that made walking impractical. Fashion trends came and went, often ridiculed by moral writers who insisted that beauty should remain humble. And yet, even these excesses followed the same logic. They were not meant to show the body. They were meant to distract from it. In medieval beauty, the body was something to be mediated, softened, and interpreted through fabric. Clothing was a filter between the physical and the social world. Consider how this changes the way beauty feels. There is no pressure here to be eternally youthful. Wrinkles are hidden by hoods. Weight changes disappear beneath layers. The body is allowed to exist quietly, without constant inspection. This is not to say medieval life was gentle. Far from it. But the aesthetic ideal offered a kind of visual rest. Beauty was not sharp. It was not loud. It did not demand constant performance. Clothing created stillness. Even movement was slowed. Long skirts encouraged shorter steps. Heavy fabrics made people more aware of their bodies and space. Gestures became smaller, more deliberate. Beauty emerged not from speed or exposure, but from composure. And perhaps that is why medieval illustrations feel so calm to us today. Figures stand. They sit. They wait. Their clothing anchors them to the ground, to the moment. Nothing flutters too wildly. Nothing breaks the rhythm. In this sense, medieval beauty was deeply connected to rest. As the day ended, garments were removed carefully. Linen was aired. Wool was brushed. Clothing was treated almost like a companion that had carried the body through time. Beauty did not vanish when the gown was folded. It lingered in the fabric itself. And as night settled, the body returned to softness, unshaped by layers, unseen by judgment. Perhaps this is why medieval beauty, when observed slowly, feels so fitting for sleep. It does not ask to be admired quickly. It asks to be noticed gently. It invites the eyes to slow down, the mind to soften, and the body to rest beneath layers of history, cloth, and quiet meaning. If clothing was the language of medieval beauty, then accessories were its punctuation marks. Small, deliberate, and never accidental. In a world where the body was wrapped, softened, and hidden, accessories offered a rare chance to speak without raising one's voice. They did not reveal. They suggested. They did not demand attention. They invited it, quietly, carefully, and only for a moment. Let us begin with hair, because hair was powerful. In medieval Europe, uncovered hair was not simply a physical feature. It was a statement. For women especially, hair carried meanings tied to age, status, morality, and control. Long, flowing hair symbolized youth, fertility, and emotional openness, which is precisely why it was rarely displayed. Once a woman married, her hair was expected to disappear. Veils, wimples, and coifs became everyday companions. They framed the face, softened the jawline, and erased the wildness of loose hair. Beauty was not lost beneath these coverings. It was refined, contained, redirected. There is something almost theatrical about this. The face became the stage, carefully bordered by cloth. Eyebrows, forehead, and expression took center focus. Hair, though present, became an unseen foundation, a hidden structure supporting visible beauty. And yet, not all coverings were equal. A finely layered veil, clean and evenly folded, spoke of patience and care. A wimple worn just so could suggest elegance without excess. The art was not in having many accessories, but in wearing them as if they were part of the body itself. Men, too, participated in this language. Hats were more than protection from the cold. They announced role and respectability. A hood pulled low suggested humility or labor. A structured cap hinted at civic life, trade, or learning. Removing one's hat was a gesture of acknowledgement, of deference, of quiet social choreography. Jewelry entered this world cautiously. Rings, brooches, and simple chains appeared, but rarely in abundance. Beauty was not measured by sparkle, but by restraint. A single brooch fastening a cloak was enough. It held fabric together and identity in place. Gold and gemstones existed, but their power lay in their scarcity. Wearing them constantly would dull their meaning. Beauty was something to be rationed. Even belts, once purely functional, gained symbolic weight. They framed the body gently, never tightly. A belt decorated with modest metalwork suggested stability, not display. It said, "This body is organized, this life is in order." Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of medieval accessories is how they controlled visibility. Nothing was entirely hidden. Nothing was entirely revealed. A veil might lift slightly in conversation. A hood might fall back while walking. A ring might catch the light briefly before the hand returns to stillness. These small moments carried far more beauty than constant exposure ever could. And this is where the mystery settles in. Medieval beauty thrived on partial knowledge. You were not meant to see everything. You were meant to imagine. This approach slowed desire. It softened judgment. It allowed beauty to unfold over time, not instantly. In a way, accessories taught people how to look slowly. There is a quiet humor in this restraint. In a society filled with rules, people still found ways to express individuality, through the angle of a veil. The choice of a clasp, the wear of a familiar ring. Tiny rebellions, neatly dressed. As night approached, these accessories were removed with care. Veils folded. Rings placed aside. Hoods hung in familiar places. The body returned to anonymity, and beauty rested. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was rushed. And perhaps that is the secret hidden beneath layers of cloth and centuries of dust. Beauty did not belong to the surface. It belonged to timing. To when something was shown. To when it was withheld. To the quiet art of being seen just enough. As this day of medieval adornment fades, the world grows quieter. Cloth softens sound. Light dims. And the body, once again, slips gently into rest, unburdened by display, held by history, and ready to sleep. Once the veil is in place, once the ring has settled on the finger, and once the hat has been removed and set aside, something curious happens. The body becomes quiet. In medieval beauty, the body was not meant to perform. It was meant to rest within its boundaries. And it was through posture, through how one stood, sat, or waited, that beauty revealed itself most clearly. Let us begin with shape, not as anatomy, but as impression. Medieval ideals favored bodies that appeared stable and well supported. Not thin in the modern sense. Not sharply defined. Beauty lived in forms that suggested nourishment, warmth, and endurance. A softly rounded figure hinted at access to food and protection from hardship. It was a visual language of survival. But clothing did most of the shaping. Beneath layers of wool and linen, the body was gently guided into stillness. Sharp angles were softened. Motion was slowed. The natural shape of the body mattered less than the calm shape it presented to the world. Posture completed the image. Standing upright was not about dominance. It was about order. A straight back signaled discipline. A lowered gaze suggested humility. Hands held close to the body conveyed restraint. Beauty was not loud. It was composed. There is a quiet humor in imagining this world of careful posture. After all, medieval life was anything but calm. Fields demanded labor. Roads demanded endurance. Bodies ached. Yet when visible to others, the body adopted stillness like a garment. Sitting was perhaps the most revealing posture of all. Chairs were not casual objects. Sitting upright on a bench or stool required balance and patience. Slouching suggested laziness or lack of control. A beautiful person sat as if time moved slowly around them. And waiting was everywhere. Waiting in halls. Waiting in churches. Waiting in marketplaces. The medieval body learned to exist in pause. Beauty emerged not from action, but from the ability to remain present without movement. This is where stillness becomes almost poetic. In stillness, breath becomes visible. Fabric settles. Accessories stop shifting. The body, no longer performing, simply exists. Beauty lived in that existence. Even gestures were measured. A nod, a folded hand, a slight turn of the head. These movements were small, deliberate, and full of meaning. They did not interrupt the calm. They complemented it. Modern eyes might see this as restraint. Medieval eyes saw it as grace. There was also an unspoken understanding that the body was temporary. It would age. It would weaken. It would eventually fail. Beauty, therefore, was not found in youth alone, but in how the body carried time. A composed posture aged well. Stillness softened years. This acceptance added depth to medieval beauty. It was not anxious. It did not chase perfection. It honored endurance. And in this, there is something deeply soothing. As evening approached, bodies naturally slowed. Posture relaxed slightly. Stillness deepened. The same body that had stood and sat with care now surrendered gently to rest. Clothing loosened. Accessories were removed. The body returned to itself, free from display. Beauty did not disappear. It simply changed shape. In the quiet hours, beauty belonged not to how one looked, but to how one rested. And perhaps that is the most peaceful lesson hidden in medieval ideals. That beauty could exist without effort. That stillness itself could be enough. As this session drifts toward silence, the body no longer needs to hold itself upright. It may soften. It may settle. It may sleep. History, too, becomes still. After stillness comes something even slower. Time. In the medieval world, time did not rush. It passed quietly, often unnoticed, leaving its marks gently rather than suddenly. And beauty, unlike our modern understanding of it, did not resist this passage. It learned to live with it. Aging was not hidden. It was expected. Lines on the face were not signs of failure. They were signs of survival. A body that aged was a body that had endured seasons, hunger, labor, and rest. Beauty did not vanish with youth, it changed texture. Imperfection, too, was woven into this understanding. A scar was not always something to conceal. It told a story. A crooked finger spoke of work done. A missing tooth was not unusual. Faces were not expected to be symmetrical. Bodies were not expected to be flawless. There is a gentle comfort in this. Medieval beauty ideals did not demand the erasure of time. They accepted its presence, as long as it remained orderly. Cleanliness mattered. Composure mattered. But perfection did not. This acceptance softened the anxiety of aging. Hair changed color, and coverings adapted. Wrinkles deepened, and posture compensated. The body learned new ways to remain composed. Beauty aged alongside the person. And importantly, beauty was not isolated to youth. Older figures appear in medieval illustrations not as diminished, but as stable. They sit calmly. They observe. Their presence carries weight. Wisdom itself became an aesthetic. Time moved through daily routines. Morning light across linen. Evening shadows on wool. The repetition of dressing and undressing, of folding cloth, of sitting in the same place. These rhythms made aging almost invisible. Change happened so slowly that it barely registered. Imperfection was managed gently, not erased. Herbal balms soothed skin. Simple grooming maintained order. Nothing promised youth. Everything promised continuity. There is something deeply peaceful about a beauty standard that does not demand reversal. Time, after all, cannot be pushed back. Medieval culture understood this intuitively. Beauty did not fight time. It accompanied it. Even illness, when survived, left marks that were accepted. A limp altered posture. A scar altered symmetry. The body adapted, and beauty adapted with it. This adaptability is key. Beauty was not fixed. It moved at the same pace as life. As people aged, their role in visual culture shifted. Younger bodies worked. Older bodies waited, watched, and rested. Stillness deepened. Movement softened. And in this slowing, beauty became quieter. By evening, time seemed to stretch. Shadows grew long. Faces relaxed into familiarity. There was no urgency to look a certain way for tomorrow. Tomorrow would arrive regardless. The medieval world did not measure beauty in moments. It measured it in years. And so, as this session fades, time itself becomes part of the atmosphere. It slows the breath. It softens thought. It invites rest. Aging, imperfection, and time, three things modern beauty often fears, become her companions. They sit gently beside the body, unthreatening, patient. And as history drifts further into quiet, the present moment becomes still enough to sleep. As time leaves its marks on the body, another force quietly shapes it as well. Work. In the medieval world, beauty did not float freely above daily life. It was grounded firmly in class, labor, and necessity. And no matter how calm the ideals appeared in manuscripts and sermons, the reality of work placed clear limits on how beauty could be lived. For those who labored, the body told its own story. Hands grew rough. Skin darkened in the sun. Posture bent under repetition. These changes were not flaws in a moral sense, but they moved bodies further away from the visual ideals celebrated by the upper classes. This was not cruelty. It was structure. Medieval beauty was shaped by the same hierarchies that shaped food, shelter, and rest. Those who worked outdoors carried the marks of it visibly. Those who lived indoors preserved softness longer. Yet even within these limits, beauty adapted. Among laboring classes, beauty appeared in endurance. In steady posture despite fatigue. In the rhythm of movement. In the quiet dignity of familiarity with one's tools and tasks. There was no expectation of perfection. Survival itself carried weight. Clothing, again, played its role. Work garments were practical, worn, and repeatedly mended. Their beauty lay in function. A well-patched sleeve spoke of care. A faded color spoke of long use. Beauty was not about newness, but continuity. The upper classes, meanwhile, had the privilege of distance. Distance from labor. Distance from sun. Distance from visible wear. Their beauty standards reflected this separation. Paleness, stillness, and layered clothing were not merely aesthetic choices. They were signs of freedom from physical strain. This divide created tension. Not everyone could, or wanted to, fit the ideal. And yet the ideal persisted, quietly reinforcing class boundaries through appearance. But medieval culture did not completely deny beauty to the working body. Art and literature often portrayed laborers with respect. Their strength was acknowledged. Their role was essential. Beauty, in this context, became moral rather than visual. It resided in contribution, not presentation. There is a quiet fairness in this recognition. Beauty was not a universal standard applied equally. It was a framework adjusted by circumstance. And as bodies aged within their class roles, these limits became clearer. An aging laborer did not attempt to preserve youth. There was no illusion to maintain. The body rested when it could. Beauty softened into familiarity. Time, labor, and class converged into acceptance. In the evening, differences blurred slightly. Everyone rested. Everyone removed layers. Everyone shared the same darkness. Beauty, then, became less about visibility and more about presence. This shift toward acceptance makes medieval beauty feel surprisingly humane. It did not promise equality. But it did not demand constant striving either. It acknowledged limits. As night settled, work ceased. The body, regardless of class, grew quiet. Marks of labor faded into shadow. Beauty rested. And perhaps that is the most peaceful truth hidden here. Beauty had boundaries. And within those boundaries, people lived, worked, aged, and slept. As this session fades, history itself seems to settle into stillness, ready to release its grip and allow rest to take over. As our journey through medieval beauty slowly comes to a close, nothing dramatic remains. There are no final standards to meet. No rules to remember. Only a sense of quiet understanding. We have moved through skin and cloth, through posture and stillness, through age, labor, and time itself. And what remains, when all these layers are set aside, is something very simple. Beauty was never meant to be chased. In the medieval world, beauty existed within limits. Limits of class. Limits of health. Limits of age. And yet, within those boundaries, people found ways to be at ease with themselves. They covered what needed to be covered. They revealed only what was appropriate. They accepted what time left behind. Beauty was not an achievement. It was a state of balance. This balance is what lingers now. Imagine the final moments of a medieval day. Garments folded. Veils set aside. Rings removed. Bodies no longer arranged for the world. The body returns to itself. Unobserved and unjudged. The room grows dim. The world narrows to breath and stillness. No one is watching. No one is measuring. Beauty rests. This is perhaps the quiet wisdom hidden beneath centuries of fabric and custom. That beauty does not demand constant attention. That it can exist softly, without effort. Without display. As history fades into night, it releases its hold. There is nothing more to learn. Nothing more to compare. The mind may let go. If any image remains, let it be a simple one. A body at rest. A room at peace. Time slowing to the rhythm of breath. And as the story ends, sleep may begin. Thank you for resting with history. Good night.